All right, well, good morning. Today we are just starting a two-part series called One Hit Wonders. We're going to be looking at some sort of obscure books in the Bible. And so we had some fun with this. As Jake mentioned, we did some TikTok videos, right? Anybody on TikTok? Go ahead, you're on TikTok. Anybody? Like 4 of you. Awesome. I'm on TikTok if you want to follow me. Anyway, as we did these videos, we had Jake do one, it was funny, I did one, it was funny, and then we had Andy in Monroe. I just want to give a shout out to Andy in Monroe. He is the campus pastor there, and Andy didn't feel super comfortable getting on the video and doing something, but he wanted to do something because he wanted to get people excited about this. So one of the biggest one-hit wonders out there is I'm Too Sexy. And so, he got this out, and, it would have been funny. I thought it would have been funny if he was just doing I'm Too Sexy, right? And instead, what he did is he dressed up his cat in, a romper and then played I'm Too Sexy while he undressed the cat. And we don't have a high standard for what we will and will not allow around here, but we were like, oh, heck no. I don't think we can do it. So Monroe, I just want you guys to know, you are in great hands. At that moment, I went, no, Andy's the guy. He's the guy for this job. Anyway, and also, this is just something we all need to know. Actually, next week, Brighton, we broadcast to Monroe right now. Next week, it's going to be coming from Brighton to Monroe. And so this is our last week together with Monroe. Right? Oh, so we need to I engage everybody to sing with me, right? Go with me. It's so hard to say goodbye. Sing it, Monroe. To yesterday. Okay. It's good. I'm excited. You guys are going to get not this anymore. So, hey, we are in One Hit Wonders, and we are looking at some obscure books in the Bible. Next week, we're gonna go into the book of Jude, which is going to be really cool. This week, we are looking at the smallest book in the Bible. It is 3 John, 219 words in 3 John. It's probably a book that many of you may not even realize exists. And the reason it exists is very unique. It has a very specific point. John is writing this. Now, you need to know this about John. John wrote one of the Gospels. As you start reading through the Bible, there's Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Guess which one John wrote? John. I know some people are like, man, the Bible is so hard to understand. And I'm like, yeah, it's a lot simpler than you might think. And he also wrote the book of Revelation. You know that because he starts out by saying, I, John, right? And then he wrote 3 letters. And that's 1 John, 2 John, 3 John. This is simple stuff to understand. Anyway, in the book of 3 John, he has a very specific moment. This is a letter written for a purpose, and he's not unpacking a lot of big, deep theology. He has a person that he's writing to, and he has a reason that he is writing. And there's only 219 words. This is something that could easily fit on a legal pad if you're writing this out. This is not a long letter. So let's jump in to 3 John chapter 1. He says this. The elder, that he's talking about himself, this is who I am, I'm the elder. John's old at this point, that's all he means by this. I am old and a spiritual leader. To my dear friend Gaius, I'm so glad I looked that up. I was saying Gaius, and I just thought, how am I going to get through this whole service calling this guy Gaius? Anyway, to my dear friend Gaius, whom I love in the truth. So this is a letter written to a guy from John. And he has a specific point. Now, when I have a specific point on a phone call, I get to the point. But I always have these niceties that I do. And you can tell that John's doing that. He starts off the letter real nice, and then he gets to the point, and then he concludes. It's kind of like I got 2 kids in college. Every time the FAFSA deadline comes up, it's time for me to call my kids because I want to make sure they get that free money. So I'll call them up and I'll be like, hey, how are things? Is the food good? You making friends? Are you homesick at all? Hey, did you fill out your FAFSA? Did you get that all done? Is it all done? Because you need, no pressure, but you need to get that done soon. In fact, you should probably, as soon as you get off the phone, in fact, there's a little bit of pressure, do it today. Hey, I love you, and hope you have a good college experience. Goodbye. Like that's kind of the point. Here in 3 John, he's got that exact point. He says some really nice things, but then he gets to the point. And his point is, you guys, where he's at the church that Gaius is at, he's like, you guys are letting a bad man influence you. You are being controlled and manipulated and influenced by a bad person. And I wanted to warn you that you've got a wolf in sheep's clothing among you. And this is a lesson that everybody needs to hear. This is a lesson that if you're a new Christian, I want to come out and I want to set the expectations. I want you to know as a new Christian, you are going to experience wolves in sheep's clothing. And you need to put up your guard. And you need to be prepared to find controlling and manipulative people. And you need to not allow them to influence you. And if you've been a Christian for a long time, you're sitting out there after we go through this whole thing, you're going to look and go, yeah, I've allowed somebody to do that in my life. Because this happens. And I'm not talking about other churches. I'm talking about right here in these seats. You might find somebody like this. And the answer is not to get all hurt and offended and leave the church. The answer is what John says. He's like, listen, don't let this person control, manipulate, and influence your life. So here's how we figure it out. In 3 John 1:9, he says, I wrote to the church, but Diotrephes. Now, everybody needs to remember Diotrephes because he is the bad guy. He's the villain. He's the controller. He's the manipulator. He's the influencer. He's the reason 3 John exists. Now, to help you remember that he's the bad guy, I like to call him Diotrephes because he's a turd. Diotrephes is the bad guy, and he is influencing the church. And now, here's what happens. John gives a criteria. He says, listen, this is why you know he's a bad guy. And I think we can glean from this. I think that you and I, as we're reading John's mail to Gaius, I think you and I can look at this and go, this is the criteria that should cause us to put up our guard, to not be taken in by somebody who's controlling, manipulative, and is going to lead us in a bad direction. So here's the criteria. This is essential. He says, I wrote to the church, but Diotrephes, who loves to be first, will not welcome us. Catch that. Diotrephes' big crime in life is that he loves to be first. My guess is that Diotrephes is probably charismatic. He's probably got a big personality. He's got something about him that people like. Maybe he's a good communicator. Maybe he's just good with people. Maybe he's very, very knowledgeable of the Bible. There's something about Diotrephes that people love. We're going to find out later that he's actually a church leader. And John says, I want to ignore all of that and tell you what the problem is, though. The problem is he loves to be first. In your life, when you find somebody who loves to be first, you need to be very, very careful. You need to limit that person's influence in your life. Don't you think that if you're a high schooler in here, and you have lots of friends in high school, and you're hanging out with this one friend, and that friend over and over again proves to be somebody who puts themselves before other people, who puts themselves before you, who puts themselves before the relationship. I'm not saying you can't be friendly and be nice to them. By all means, be friendly and be nice to them, but they should not be your BFF. They should not be somebody that you want to spend a lot of time around because they're going to put themselves ahead of you and they're going to influence you in some bad directions. If you're out there dating, in the dating world, whether you're teenager or older or whatever, and you're dating, and ladies, maybe you got a guy out there and you're dating him, and he's checking all the boxes. He's hot, and he's got a job. And those are all the boxes right there. He's hot, he's got a job. You need to add one more box to check. Does he put himself first? Now, all of us put ourselves first at some times, right? Like, we are selfish people. We do that at times. But I'm talking about consistently, over time. If he keeps putting himself first and convincing you that it's okay that he put himself first, you need to be done with him. I'm not just talking about, like, you need to have a conversation. If he has put himself first over and over and continued to form a pattern, his wants, needs, and desires are more important than your wants, needs, and desires. Let me just speak real clear. You do not want to be married to that. Drop him, right? I hope that I just broke somebody up today. Anyway, but let me talk to you in the church world, like in the church world. You're going to meet a lot of people, especially if you're new, but if you're coming in here, you're going to meet a lot of people. You're going to go to small groups. You're going to find leaders. You're going to talk to people, and you're going to meet some incredibly awesome people. But there are wolves in sheep clothing. In every congregation, in every church, there are people who, man, maybe they got that charisma. Maybe they know a lot about the Bible. Maybe they inspire you for some reason. But if they put themselves first, they are not the kind of person that you want influencing your life. Now, you might be thinking, well, why is put yourself first such a big deal? Because it was one of the big things that Jesus taught. This is like huge. This is a huge thing that Jesus taught. In fact, there's this great story in Mark chapter 9, verse 33. I love this story. Jesus is traveling with his disciples, his companions, the people that he chose. He's traveling along with them, and they began to have an argument. Now, what do you think some of the most godly people that have ever lived are going to argue about, right? Who's more humble? Are they going to argue about, like, who knows more Scripture or where Scripture? You'd think they're arguing about where things are found in the Old Testament or something like that. No, check it out. It says they came to Capernaum. When he was in the house, he asked them, "What were you arguing about on the road?" I just love it when Jesus, he's so coy. He knows what they were arguing about. I do that with my kids. I'll overhear them in a room right down. They'll come downstairs and be like, "Hey, what were you guys talking about?" I know what you were talking about, but Jesus is like, "No, I just want you to articulate these words to me." And this is what it says. But they kept quiet. Oh, no. Because on the way, they had argued about who was the greatest. They were fighting about which of them was the greatest. What does that argument even look like? Well, you know, Jesus sat next to me at supper last night. Did you notice that? Did you notice that Jesus said? I don't know what the greatest looks like, but that's what they were doing. They were like chugging, and they were actually making a case back and forth. Now, these guys were on the younger side, so it might have been like smack talk. But I just can't imagine Jesus hearing this. Jesus is getting ready to pour out his life to serve humanity. And they're back there arguing about which is the greatest. And then Jesus gave them the most important leadership information they could ever know. He says, sitting down, Jesus called the 12 and said, "Anyone who wants to be first must be the very last and the servant of all." John is writing Gaius, and he's reminding him, he's saying, Diotrephes loves to be first. So he is breaking the one rule that Jesus gave leaders. He is breaking that one rule. He is influencing people in the wrong direction. And you might be thinking, well, how do people get swept up in that? I don't know. But you need to know it happens a lot. People get swept up into the charisma of people or the personality of people or their knowledge of the Bible. And some people are really good at talking super spiritual. That's always a flag for me. Like I love it when people like talk spiritual, like sincerely. But when it's just a bunch of lingo, I'm just like, ugh, I don't like that. All of a sudden it sounds like a politician. Sounds like somebody that's putting on a front to look at it. And you think, how do people get caught up in this? And John's saying, listen, the number one criteria is if they put themselves first, it doesn't matter how much they know about the Bible. It doesn't matter how spiritual they talk. It doesn't matter how charismatic they are. They are breaking the big rule. So, what Diotrephes do you have in your lives? What is the person that you have allowed to put themselves first, and you are following that? And then John goes to kind of another level, and he says it's not just that. It goes deeper than that. Here's the next criteria. He says, so when I come, I will call attention to what he is doing. Spreading malicious nonsense about us. John's like, he's not just putting himself first, because this is a classic move of anybody that's manipulative. You need to remind yourself of this. People who are manipulative will tear down everybody else so that they look like the hero. That's a big sign. You got to pay attention to that. Again, you got that friend in high school, you got that guy you're dating, you got that person you know in the church. If you hear them tearing down maliciously other people, not just talking about other people, we all talk about other people, but I'm talking about tearing down people maliciously. Guess what they do when you're not around? Always. And we convince ourselves, no, they love me. I'm the one person that they don't destroy when I'm not around. No, they do it to you too. That's exactly what's happening. They're tearing down everybody else so they look good. This goes from just somebody that's a little bit selfish to somebody who is the center of everything. This becomes a full-blown narcissist. I think John is using ancient language, first century language, to describe what we know as a narcissist. I love the story of Narcissus, just in case you don't know it. Greek god, Narcissus, Greek mythology. He was very beautiful, so maybe that's why I like the story. I can connect with him, you know. He was very beautiful, and one of his enemies led him to a pool, and he saw his own reflection, and he fell in love with his reflection. You know that the guy that came up with this story was watching his teenage son in a mirror, right, or something. So anyway, because they do that too. Anyway, he fell in love with his own reflection, and there he died because he knew that he could never find anybody as wonderful to love as himself. That's where the word narcissist comes from. That's what he's describing. He's like, man, this is a guy that is putting himself first, and now he's tearing down everybody else around him because he wants to be the prettiest. He wants to be the most beautiful. When you see that happening in somebody's lives, I'm not saying you treat them like they're dead, but you need to stop allowing them to influence your life. You need to stop dating them. If you're dating them, if you're best friends with them, you can still be friends with them, but do not be best friends with somebody who is maliciously spreading nonsense about other people. Next verse. He gives us another criteria. He says, not satisfied with that, he even refuses to welcome other believers. Now, we just have to make an assumption about what he's talking about here, but he has gotten into this mindset where he is now controlling who comes into the kingdom of God, who comes into the church, and who can't come into the church. He is controlling everything. He has put himself in God's seat. He also stops those who want to do so and puts them out of the church. You have the trifecta here. You got somebody who puts themselves first, maliciously tears other people down, and has a control issue. This is the definition of a toxic person. And you might be thinking, oh yeah, no, we all know that. Yeah, but do you know who toxic people love to prey on? Good-hearted people. Innocent people, good-hearted people that are super trusting and super full of love and like to follow people along. And a toxic person will come in and they will look at that and they'll go, pure gold, baby. I can wrap them around my finger. And many of you out there have been in that situation and you've seen it happen in other people's lives. And it is awful. And it will destroy you. And when it comes to the church world, here's what the worst part is. It distorts your idea of who God is. That's where it gets so dangerous. Now, all of a sudden, this toxic person preying on your innocent heart is now leading you to define and understand God as somebody that he just is not. And I've seen so many people be led astray by that. In fact, let me just tell you where this comes from. This comes from watching a lot of people who have suffered like spiritual abuse. And here's what I want you to do. I don't want you to leave the church. Just this past week on our social media, somebody says, man, I'm really interested in coming to your church. This happens a lot. I'm really interested in coming to your church, but I've been hurt. I've been hurt. And what I want to respond, I don't do it because it's on social media, but what I want to respond is I want to say, like, no, you let yourself get hurt. You let yourself be controlled. You let yourself be manipulated. You put too much trust in a person's charisma, Bible knowledge, understanding. You allowed yourself to be controlled and manipulated. And John is writing this letter saying, don't do that. And then he gets to his point. Now that he's done talking about Diotrephes, he's been working on it all week, I promise. 3 John 1:11, I think, is his whole point. He says, listen, so here's my teaching. Dear friend, do not imitate what is evil, but what is good. Well, duh, like, right? Like he really had to get out his parchment paper and write that down? Don't imitate evil people, imitate good people. And the reason he has to write that is because he's, listen, I need you to understand, if they don't look like Jesus, then you shouldn't imitate them. If they don't talk like Jesus, then you shouldn't be like them. And I don't care how much charisma they have, and I don't care how much Bible they know, if they don't act like Jesus, if they aren't a servant of all, and this is somebody that you should not be imitating and allowing to influence your life. And he kind of doubles up. He says, anyone who does what is good is from God. Anyone who does what is evil has not seen God. Now, what's he saying? He's saying that a prominent church leader isn't even a Christian. That's what he's saying. He's saying this guy that is controlling the church and talks the spiritual talk and walks the spirit, he's got this vibe and this lingo out there. He is keeping people from coming into the church, and I want you to know something about him. He hasn't even seen God. He doesn't even have a relationship with God. God has not been moving and challenging and changing in his life, and you need to be careful. And then he kind of switches gears, which I love. He warns it, and I want you to be thinking about who that person is in your life that you've allowed to kind of control, manipulate. Man, the last thing you should ever do is walk out of a church. People do this all the time. They're like, well, that person's controlling me. I'm out of here. I'm like, that's not what he says. He doesn't say, hey, you should leave the church. You should go start your own church. You should go do a small group or something like that. He doesn't do that. He says, just don't be like him. Don't be like him. Don't imitate him. On the other hand, you ought to replace him with somebody that's worth following. So he says this. Demetrius is well spoken of by everyone, and even by the truth itself. Think about that. If you want to think about somebody to imitate, you need to think about somebody that's spoken of well, not just by a few people that are inside of his cult, but like thought of well by everyone. And even spoken of well by the truth. What does that mean? It means if you look at the fruit of his life and you hold it up against the truth, the gospel, you'll see that they're the same. His life looks like Jesus. There's one of the campus pastors in Ann Arbor. His name is Albo, and he is from Kenya. And I got to spend quite a bit of time with Albo over the last couple weeks. We went to Chicago together, and he drove. And he's deep. And it may be just because he has this heavy Kenyan accent. Like people that have those heavy accents just seem deeper. Like I can get up here and say, hey, God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son. Or he could get up here and be like, God loved the world so much that he gave his only begotten son. I don't know, he sounds like he's from India. But anyway, I tried. Maybe I need to spend more time with him. But everything he says sounds really deep. And one of the things he told me is like, man, in Kenya, there's impoverished places, there's people that don't have anything, and they want a hero. And so there's these super pastors that come into town, and they're wearing expensive suits, and they have an entourage of people wearing expensive suits, and they're coming into the slums in Kenya. They're coming into villages in Kenya, and they're walking in big time, and then they get up and they talk about Jesus. And Albo's just like, and I don't get it. I don't understand how they could understand the gospel, which is the story about Jesus who came to this earth in a middle lower class family, spent his entire time without really a place to live or exist, and at the end of his life gave up everything. I don't get how a guy in a $3,000 suit can come into a village and talk about that Jesus and have people go, wait a minute, something's wrong here. The person's life has to match the truth. The fruit of who a person is has to match what Jesus is. Jesus was humble in heart. Jesus served his people. Jesus put other people first. Jesus sacrificed. Jesus was generous. And that's who the people that you follow, the people who influence you, that should be on your top 5 list. Those are the kind of people you give influence to. And the other people you love, you care for, you kind of keep them at arm's length, though. And do not allow them to influence your life. And then he concludes by saying, we also speak well of him. In other words, I, John, one of the apostles, one of the people that told you about Jesus' resurrection from the dead in the first place, we also speak well of him, and you know that our testimony is true. So you have some criteria in your life. I want you to look at the people you know, the people that you influence your life, and I want you to ask the question, who do you allow to influence you? Because they are influencing you. They're shaping you. They're changing you. Some of you have tried to deepen in your relationship with God. You've tried to get deeper. You've tried to find more faith. And it's just been tough. It's like been carrying a load that's too heavy, and you just keep going back to the same spot. Do you know why that is? Because the people who influence you haven't changed. It's the same people that were influencing you before, the same people influencing you now. And we talk about small groups around here, and we talk about getting into Rooted, and we talk about serving on teams. And I want you to know the whole purpose of that. Yeah, we've got a mission to accomplish, and yeah, there's some important things we got to get done. But what we want to do is we want to help you find the people who can influence your life. Man, when you get to a place where the most influential people in your life are sold-out followers of Jesus, who are servants like Jesus was, who put others first like Jesus did. When you are surrounded by people like that, faith is easy. Faith gets really easy. Growing in your faith, understanding the Bible more, deepening in your prayer life, all the things that we all want, it gets so easy because the people around us are influencing us. So, who do you influence? As you kind of think about that, I want you to think about the criteria of who you need to distance in your life and who you need to seek after. Let me pray for you. God, I pray that you would help us to be wise. As we take kind of the next steps in understanding our relationships, our friendships, God, I pray that you would help us to use this filter that is given to us here in 3 John to understand who we need to imitate and who we do not need to imitate. God, I pray that you would guide us. I pray that you would give wisdom to every person as they think through those relationships. God, help us to follow and be influenced by people who are like you. And I pray that in Christ's name. Amen. Right now, we're going to be moving into a time